We have a mix. So, Linda, just a bit of a background. This is kind of our current students, but also our alumni. And we developed these Tuesday Talks / Wednesday for Linda to keep our colleagues and friends connected. And you are the sixth participant that we've had, and we've had everybody from Mike Kuskowski gave a presentation on his early research that they did on how people are receiving information, who do they trust that way. We've had others that have given presentations on different like Steve and Tina did one on the research that IPR and Peppercom had done as well. And so this is kind of just our value add and trying to make sure that we find ways to connect our community, MCM community, with leading professionals in the field, just to get some insights as well. So that's where we are. So we're going to start. It's 12:03. I know people are going to join as they're coming along. And today on Tuesday / Wednesday Talks, we have the pleasure of having my very good friend, Linda Rutherford, who's the Senior VP, Chief Communication Officer at the Fun Airline, the one full of love. Those of us who have flown it over the years that have experienced Southwest Airlines have known that it is a culturally distinct airline in a very competitive space. Linda and I have served on the boards of the IP for Public Relations, and she's a recent addition to the board of the Page Society. 2 years ago, I think you came on board.
Yep. A couple years ago.
And for those who are governance gurus or people that really get excited about bylaws and governance issues with organizations, you've met your match with Linda Rutherford, because she is the top drawer in any governance group that I have ever been involved in. She chaired IPR. She's the past chair. Currently, the current chair is Steve Codu, who we had last week. But Linda sat in that seat for a couple years, and there's nothing better than being on a volunteer board when you have a professional at the steering wheel. And so, Linda, I've always valued what you've brought to both of those boards over the years. So if you had her bio, and they do this kind of fun thing at Southwest, they they give you her job description, what her experience is. She's been at Southwest Airlines since 1992, 28 years. She graduated from a journalism program at Texas Tech, and she's a very strong and vocal and engaged alum of that program. And they've got a really great Guy Golan has just gone there. Guy is formerly from Syracuse, University of Florida, and he's joining Julie O'Neill. So really strong group of people as well. First paying job. Do you have video of this? Because that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see video of this first paying job. A roller skating car hop at Sonic Drive-In.
Yeah, thankfully that was before the days of social media. It might have been before the days of motorized vehicles. So,
so she's always been in the transportation business, I guess.
Yeah.
We've talked about this session as communications in turbulent times, and that's it. Period. Right? We're in turbulent times across the board, but being in the commercial airline industry in North America at this period of time, and to be in that CCO seat has got to be probably one of the most difficult challenges that you've faced. Not only the 737 MAX, but those who were in my crisis course last summer, Linda gave a case study on an incident that Southwest Airlines had. But now just the shuttering almost of the entire aviation industry. And so I asked Linda to come in and give us some perspective and to really have a dialogue about what it's like to be the CCO of Fortune 100 company. Are you in the 100 group?
I don't know if we're in the 100 or not. I know we're Fortune 500. Yeah.
And then also, what is her CCO and her C-suite demanding of the communications team that she now leads, of which there are over 100 people? You have on your team?
And yeah, we do.
Right.
Yep.
So, without further ado, and this is really upsetting because this summer we were having an IPR board meeting in their offices in Dallas, and I we haven't officially canceled it, but
Yeah,
it was not going to
I
happen.
think well, yeah, I think we're going to head to another virtual meeting, which is disappointing because we were looking forward to having the IPR board in Dallas.
So, Linda, welcome, Linda, and welcome our 35 MCM alum, participants, students, and friends from across the world.
Well, thank you, Terry. I appreciate the gracious introduction, and thanks for taking some time out today. Certainly, this has been unlike anything I've experienced in my entire life, which I'm sure many of us can say as we're just thinking about, what's happening in the world. In my professional capacity, it has been another intense learning experience, where we actually do. Terry mentioned it, and I thought I would take a little bit of time with that this morning. Is just having dual crises, sort of one stacked on top of the other. And how you manage and prioritize, dealing with each of those in their own in their own context, and then really helping all of our various audiences through all of that. So customers and regulators and employees and our communities. So it's been a real challenge. Those of you in communication, practicing communication, certainly know that. Um, a lot of times we operate in the background, and then when crisis happens, you're sort of pushed right out front, um, so that everyone can see you shine, hopefully, during times of crises. And it's hard because emotions are high. The stress levels are up. Everyone's feeling their emotions a little bit come to the forefront, and so it's trying to not only deal with what you're feeling personally about what's happening, but then being able to sort of set that aside and make sure that everyone stays focused on what they need to with the current environment. Um, Terry said it. I mean, certainly the North American airline industry is one of the most visible industries in the world, and that's without a crisis happening. And then, of course, when we do have crises, it's an X factor in terms of the media interest, the social chatter, and just the volume of conversation that happens. And last fall, I know I spoke to Terry's group in the summer, and then last fall I was at NYU, and I was talking to their aviation group about the MAX crisis. And about how we were, looking forward to at that time bringing back the airplane either late 2019 or early 2020. And only 7-ish months later, I'm now chatting with you all about COVID. And there's certainly learnings along the way. I mean, what the world is dealing with regard to the COVID crisis is just it's unprecedented. It's never happened. There is no playbook really, even for pandemic of this level. So we're constantly sort of writing in the margins, even of the plans that we had developed, because so much is different than we expected. I would say from a leadership standpoint and certainly management of the team, there's just a few key lessons that I try to sort of take a moment to breathe and remember every day, and then help our teams stay focused, and our leadership team in particular stay focused on. And first of all, that is really know your organization's values, and repeat them. So get people to stick to them. Make sure that when teams are making decisions or you're providing guidance and counsel, that you are taking those values into account. We have something called the Southwest Way, that sort of incorporates some beliefs we have around a warrior spirit, a servant's heart, and a fun-loving attitude, and then how those come to life in terms of behaviors that we expect when it's me and how I show up to work, when it's we and I'm working with a team, and then what Southwest needs to succeed. So know your organization's values, and stick to them. But at the same time, you have to balance that with listening, because again, in the case of this COVID virus, we're learning things that we never could have expected or anticipated before. So we're probably going to learn some things that can help us be a better organization coming out of this. Secondly, and obviously with a communications bias, regular and transparent communication will always win out. And we know, and we remind our executives and we remind those who are charged with communicating that you really can't communicate too much in this fog of war, that people are anxious for information, that absent information, they will try to write their own stories, which we don't want to have happen. So I would say our communication team in particular has really been tapped to provide probably 10 times the communication that we would in a normal course of business. And that's dealing with not only the COVID virus, but then right under that, obviously, the MAX crisis situation that we have. And then I think the third thing that is just important from, again, a leadership perspective is to always remember to set the right tone. There's a lot that is unsettling and uncertain in this environment, but we have to sort of strike that balance to cast a vision for the future, to cast a tone of hope, and that we're going to do everything possible to, fill in the blank, to preserve jobs, to protect the flying public, to make flying as comfortable as it can be in the future, to adapt to a new customer set of expectations and experiences. And, you hear the phrase a lot, this too shall pass, not fast enough, but this too shall pass. And so as communicators, and then what? And so what expectations are we setting for the future, and how can we help people stay sort of motivated and engaged about what might what might happen?
Those are amazing points. And obviously the last one, setting the right tone, not just in uncertainty, but unknown, right? That sense of unknown. And, you're a federally regulated business. And while your state might say, we're going back to business, how do you fully go back to business at this period of time, especially when there's and I'm not going to be political, but when there's a push, somebody that just actually used the term warriors, calling America's now warriors. Now, we won't talk anything more about that, but how do you balance that kind of, yes, we all want to get back to business. We all want to get back to work, but we want to do it safely and we want to do it sustainably.
Yeah.
So how do you balance all of that?
It's I don't know that anyone's doing it perfectly, certainly, but we are. So we never stopped flying. Now we have 400 plus, airplanes that are currently sitting on the ground because we're not operating, the full number of flights that we would with a normal schedule. Normally every day we'd have about 4,000 daily flights. And we're down to about, between 15 and 1,800 daily flights. Our load factor dipped into the single digits, which that means that you could look at any airplane on any given day flying between any two cities, and there might be 6 people on board. Obviously, that's not sustainable as a going concern. So we are as anxious as the government is to begin to reopen the economy and allow people to begin moving around again. Now, that obviously comes with some level of risk that we have to balance. And so what our CEO has been absolutely preaching for the last week or so is a layered approach. So there are things that we need people to do from a personal accountability standpoint. There are things that we need to do as an employer to keep our employees safe. There are things that we are going to be mandating to our customers, such as wearing masks to keep them safe. We're working with our airports to see what enhanced cleaning protocols can look like. And then we're leaning on our government because we need help with contact tracing and temperature screenings. And other health protocols that, we're not in the healthcare business, we're in the transportation business. So we need help from the government, much like they did after 9/11, to create a whole new transportation infrastructure, transportation security infrastructure. We need them to be thinking about what that could look like in the future as you think about air travel coming out of what we've learned from this pandemic.
Your staff, so your 100 people, obviously, how many are them are in their regular offices?
Virtually none of them. So we very quickly adapted to. I will first tell you, Southwest Airlines certainly is a flexible work environment, but is not one that where we had a regular percentage of our employees remote working. We very much believe in our cultural bubble that we have on our corporate campus, and so the encouragement was always to be here, to be able to interact with others. And so we had to pivot very quickly as different travel restrictions and shelter-in-place orders started coming down. We're in Dallas County, in the city of Dallas in Texas, and so when those orders came down, we had to pivot very quickly to getting people out of this building and productive working from home. So we actually had a huge percentage of our employees that didn't even have laptops. So all they had were desktops. And so thinking about how to very quickly make those people productive from home was a top priority. I always worried that in a virtual work environment, with how quickly information changes, it would be hard to make sure that everybody knew that where they were. But I've honestly been extremely proud of the team and how well connected that they're staying, whether on their personal device or a laptop or their iPads. Just this morning, I was able to watch our CEO through a virtual connection in a remote studio answer a series of questions for a series that we have called Ask Gary that we're producing twice a week for our employees, and then we cut down clips for external audiences. But how far we've come from a technology standpoint to continue to be productive.
And do you think that this will redefine work at Southwest Airlines now?
Yeah, I think across the globe, it's going to redefine the future of work. And I'm sure that there are architects that are salivating at all the projects that will come their way once we're we're all in a healthier place. And thinking about how to address those physical workspaces. But I absolutely think it changes the future of work, where that work is done, how that work is accomplished, the kinds of tools. So, I mean, here we are today on WebEx. Our organization, our corporate support facilities went from 0 use of Microsoft Teams to over 80% use of Microsoft Teams in a 3-week period. So, it's good to know that a nearly 50-year-old organization can still be agile and adapt to new technology as it comes along. And obviously the communications team had a big role in educating and creating that awareness among our work groups, because it was one thing for technology to say, hey, we have all these licenses, we can roll this out. It was quite another thing to, who do you roll it out to? How do you create the training? And our teams really helped with all of that.
What new skills do you think the post-COVID communicator needs to have? Have you found things that weren't present beforehand that you think, oh, I could really use people that are professional communicators that have these new skills or capabilities?
So I don't know if I have two thoughts. I don't know that it's new, but I would definitely say that it has been dialed up, and I think will continue to be. The first one is how to be a multimedia storyteller. So gathering assets very quickly. What we have found from our media customers are, it's one thing to get them information. It's another thing to get them a quick clip of B-roll. It's another thing to get them some, meaningful photos. So, for example, last week we launched the Southwest Promise, which was sort of our commitment to how we want to get customers comfortable flying Southwest Airlines again. And, certainly marketing is going to back that up with some paid media, but we had some terrific photos on board our airplane. We had video of the electrostatic cleaners being used. And so we were able to kind of push that as a package, which the media appreciated, because of course they don't have the resources right now to go out and get that B-roll on their own, to go out and get those visuals. So I think more of that's going to happen, because media is going to be hurting. They're still going to have an obligation for storytelling, but they're going to be hurting for resources. And so if we can help meet that need, I think that's going to be huge. So that's one. The other one, and we've heard about this a lot, and you and I have this passion point around measurement and analytics, is that, we have a fairly sophisticated practice here at Southwest Airlines for, not only event, but KPI, outcomes-based measurement and analytics that we do. And what I have seen is that group has been tapped into even more in this crisis. And part of it is we don't know what we don't know about COVID. And so we're having to sort of gather that intelligence very quickly and derive insights from it and spit it back out to the organization to help make an informed decision or policy change. And the example I would give you there was, we had a real big debate last week about whether we were going to strongly encourage customers to wear masks or if we were going to require it. And so while our governmental affairs team was kind of working with elected officials and learning what the Hill wanted and our industry trade association, Cindy Villafranca and our measurement and analytics team were gathering, word clouds and sentiment from all of the social conversation, and we're able to really tip the scale from what we were going to do, which was strongly encouraged, to get us to the place where no, we're going to require it starting May 11th. The customers wear masks, and so I can see again in the future where that type of ability to gather and derive trends and insights and things like that from our measurement practice is going to be yet another way in which we're going to be, our services are going to be more in demand.
And was that based on listening to customer talk, chatter
Yes.
about Southwest, or
and so that's
just in general, people who are thinking about flying? What are they?
But both. So we have what we call the general public, right? So that's the sentiment happening out on the internet. And then we have what we call informed public, which those are the folks that we know that are customers of ours. And through our corporate listening, we have a listening center. Through those tools, we're able to sort of, divide those audiences and hear what each is saying. And then we obviously partner with marketing because they've got their customer insights practice as well. The good news is, more than ever, we're seeing alignment in that data and sentiment. So that tells us, because obviously we know our marketing partners have been far more evolved in their practices around data and analytics, but that obviously tells me that ours is maturing when I can see it matching the results that marketing is turning up.
I'm going to go to Bree had a question. She said, is the analytics team embedded with your comms team?
Yes. So there are 3 people who are focused on our analytics. And that's social listening. That's media sentiment. We've got a whole dashboard. We've got KPIs that we report up to our executive team and to the board of directors. But they also work collaboratively with our enterprise data analytics teams that are collecting operational data, that are collecting hiring data, and that are collecting the customer data, and so they are a contributor to sort of that overall enterprise reporting effort.
What advice would you give those that are, these are working professionals that might not have the close relationship that you do with your CEO and your leadership team, but that they are feeling that their advice or counsel is not being heard in this time? What advice would you give to these people to sort of, how do we clear that kind of pathway?
It's human relationships, and those are always messy. The first thing you have to have is a leader who either intuitively can communicate, is intuitively a good communicator, or who is willing to be molded and take some of that guidance and counsel from you. I'll tell you, there's not always going to be agreement. I had a situation just this morning, very frustrating, where we're trying to set up something, strategically, and that counsel was dismissed. So you don't always bat 1,000. So part of it is, even all these years in, never give up. There's an art and a science to what we do, certainly. And it really is based on the credibility that you establish through your actions and your counsel, the time that you take to nurture those relationships. I mean, they don't just happen. One of the things I'm very careful to do is maintain my one-on-one time that I have with the different executives in the C-suite, just to see how they're doing, what I can do to help them. Regular check-ins, and always asking for advice and feedback. I try to always start all our conversations with, what do you want people to say about this? Like, what do you want them to say about this? And then we kind of work back from the perfect scenario to what we think we can, go accomplish. But don't underestimate the power of relationships. We're not all blessed with executive leadership that are great communicators, and so hopefully you can, show them. I mean, I have three exceptional gentlemen as COO, president, and chairman and CEO who are great communicators. But one of the things that we did was an analytical rhetorical analysis of their speech patterns, as an example, and we're able to kind of feed it back to them in a very gentle way to just say, here is how you come across, here are some of your favorite words that you use, here is what, when audiences watch you, here's what they resonate with. And I think even from that opportunity that we took advantage of a year and a half ago, they were able to take away some, gentle learnings, to think about body language, to think about projection, to think about word choice, that I think has even helped the three of them, who are great communicators, become even better ones.
Oh, so work me through this system. So you did discourse analysis. You analyzed their speeches or their speaking off the cuff. So that's not a prepared text.
Well, we actually looked at several different scenarios. So we looked at a prepared speech, we looked at podium, we looked at media interview, and then we looked at what I would call internal town halls. So more of that question coming at you, and then your extemporaneous answers. We got help. There is a company called Quantified Communication, and they helped us with the analysis. But it was a great tool to just be able to have the conversation, because it's one thing to go in and say, hey, in that last town hall that you had, you stumbled a couple times, and it's another thing to actually bring them back in the data to show them where word choice resonated with audiences, where there was greater scores of credibility based on the kinds of things that they said, whether there were any call outs about their body language, or how they show up physically, were they engaged with the audience, that type of thing. And so it was just a really helpful way to provide some executive level guidance in a way that wasn't, hey, let's go into media training.
Right.
Yeah.
So you obviously had to get their buy-in beforehand.
Actually,
Permit
I
it was ask for
I chose
forgiveness afterwards.
I chose to ask for forgiveness afterward. We obviously had all of this video, right, from their town halls and everything else. So I had everything collected, because what I wanted to do first was just see what it said, and then I figured I could be the filter for how and what we would choose to talk about with each of them. But honestly, the results that came back were just so robust and meaningful that we took time with Mike and with Tom and with Gary and walked them through everything. And their improvement in the last year and a half has been remarkable. And so, like I said, it was just a much better way to have the conversation than to say, hey, we're going to, hire, a local reporter or a local media training company and come in and give you some media training.
Oh, it's fantastic. That's a great. So, a couple questions have come up. Have you started crafting customer messages for the post-COVID era? So
We have.
pivoting from, initial response, now we're in this kind of mix, right, of what's happening, because we don't really know. There's no kind of endpoint to this, but we've normalized this turbulent time right now. And then, assuming we get to some point when this beard gets shaven off, that's the time. What do those messages look like, and how do you pivot towards that?
So we've got three things going on right now. I've got our CEO from when this started happening in early March. We kind of went into the chaos, controlling the chaos, and then we were in a quiet period before we were reporting our financial results. And then now coming out of that, we've got him on a media roadshow. So we've done CNN, CNBC, NPR, CBS this morning. I've got him on PBS NewsHour tonight. So we're on a media blitz for him to begin talking about what we're going to do to make people comfortable with flying again. That is meant to amplify and complement this Southwest Promise work, which talks all about what our requirements are going to look like, what our aircraft cleaning is going to look like, how we're going to maintain physical distances, all of that. And then we also have, coupled with that, we also have our social listening. So listening to what customers are anxious about, and then trying to deliver, because you can see it's a bit polarizing right now. If you look at our travel booking patterns right now, everything is 6 days or fewer. So it's oh my God, I have to go, or it's 60 days out. So it's, I really want to travel by July, August kind of thing. So there is that squishy period right now where there is some anxiety. And so we've been on sale. We were on sale last week. We are looking at how we can stimulate interest in going places. And then obviously for the communications person, I have to strike that balance of how are we going to deal with criticism of how could you possibly be for sale? We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's like, well, again, going back to that layered approach, we are mandated by the federal government to fly. We have been a recipient of CARES Act payroll support funding. So we have an essential duty to keep airplanes flying. We know that there are people that need to go places. We've had a myriad of stories over the last month of moving medical supplies, moving medical professionals from place to provide support there. But there's very simply a need for human connection. People want to go see and do, and we want to support that, recognizing that the environment has changed and what can we do to support that sort of new normal of what air travel is going to look like. So those kind of three things we have going on right now. So social listening, fair sales, supporting the promise, and then the media blitzkrieg that we have going on right now with our CEO.
Christina was just asking, how do you do your social listening? Is it a third party or do you have something built internally? And I know that you have a little bit of both.
Yeah, we do. So we have a social business team that sits within the communications function, but it works with technology and the people department and marketing, and our various internal customers on a social listening. So we've got a listening center that we're looking for trends every single day. Part of the zeitgeist. Is there a way to insert ourselves into the appropriate conversations? We're doing listening topically for Southwest. In other words, are there issues that we need to address? Twitter has also turned into our social customer care tool. So those people who are traveling on a daily basis are tweeting us their issues or sweet tweets, and we're interacting with our customers that way. It was built, it's got visualization, so it looks like you would expect sort of a NASA war room to look. And we utilize a number of different tools. We've got Cision, we've got Sprinkler, and we use a number of different tools to kind of bring all that data together and aggregate it either in visuals or in a reporting tool.
And what kind of training up did you have to do to your team to get them all comfortable with that?
The social business team is led by one of the senior directors in communication and outreach, and she comes from a customer relations background, which was extremely helpful because she was very thoughtful, didn't rush anybody out there before they were ready. The first thing you have to do is train everybody on the tools, right? Because it's just new technology and how it interacts with one another. They literally had to devise and decide what they wanted those visuals to look like, because it's a big glass room. You can walk down the hall and you can basically see what's happening in the world by looking at those screens. So they had to decide what kind of stories they wanted to tell through that. And then probably most importantly was that social care team. So we've got 36 people who are trained to 24/7 interact with our customers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And it's different than being a customer relations representative where I might be on the phone with you, or I might write you a letter or respond to an email, and that's a one-to-one conversation. When you're a social care rep, someone's tweeting at us and then you're responding, and thousands of people could see that. And so training in what we like to call the Southwest social voice is about a 3-week effort to make sure that someone is truly comfortable with all of our policies and procedures, our voice and our personality, knowing when they can interact and work autonomously, which was a huge step for us to get through with our legal department, and then when they know they need to escalate responses before they sort of go out and have those conversations on a broader stage. So that those playbooks and all of that took months and months to work out.
That must have been an interesting conversation with legal, right? That you're going to give permission to these social care reps to have those conversations that are virtually going to be public, right? Unlike a telephone center where it's one-on-one. How did you move that?
We basically, a couple things. We showed them the best practices of organizations that were already doing it. because they were obviously people that were ahead of us. We like to say that we were leading edge for the airline industry, but there were other industries that were taking that approach. So we showed them the rigor that we would go through in terms of what our escalation and decision trees would look like when we would get them involved. And then we also had an entire playbook of proposed responses so that they felt comfortable with sort of the at least the trunk of how we would respond. And then we showed them the downside of when industries did not engage. So in other words, companies that have great reputations, but for whatever reason, again, this is going back 3-4 years ago, did not have great social presence, and then something happened and they were having to create that social presence while they were dealing with the crisis, and what the downside of that was. And when legal saw that there was actually a greater liability of that, in other words, not engaging, there was a greater liability in not engaging than in training people to engage. And occasionally you might get it wrong, but we can certainly, fix those situations one-off. And that eventually, won them over, so that they were then open to kind of seeing this entire package and how it would, how we would train, how we would escalate, and how we would manage prickly situations.
That's amazing. Don Smith was asking, how much use was your crisis communications plan, and how much have you had to respond to challenges that were not anticipated?
So thankfully, we have a very robust emergency response plan. It has a whole chapter in it, which is called disaster response, and that could be anything from active shooter to active terrorism to pandemic. I think what we learned, we did the avian bird flu years ago, and we did H1N1. And what we learned is there's a lot of things that we now have to add to our pandemic plan, because all of our previous experience was short-lived. In other words, when we were dealing with a pandemic, it was literally, a few weeks. And it was largely internally focused. In other words, it didn't necessarily dampen air travel. It was more about employees asking, hey, how are you going to keep me safe? Am I allowed to wear a mask? That type of thing. So there is, first of all, a ton that in the last 2 months that we've learned that we're going to be fleshing out and completely redoing the pandemic portion of the emergency response plan. We started out with daily, what we call DR calls, so disaster response calls. It is led by our emergency director, who happens to be our SVP of operations. There could be 60 people on that call. And it is to literally get operational updates. In the very beginning, as every state and county and city were enacting these different travel restrictions, we needed to get that information very quickly to know how to adapt our route network every day, because there were places that you couldn't fly to anymore, or if you were flying, customers were going to get immediately quarantined. And so there was just a ton of communication that was in place to support all of those changes as they were happening every day. And then there was the panic around PPE. So did we have enough masks and sanitizing wipes and gloves and things like that? And so then there was a huge supply chain effort and communication and awareness. And I think that we are what I would tell you that I know we're going to think about in the future is duration. I think this has lasted such a long time that duration for us was not something that we thought about in terms of pandemic. And so, we always thought like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and we do that for our weather response, by the way. So, you have a hurricane. When the hurricane's coming, you get the airplanes out of there. The hurricane happens, you assess damage, you see what the local community needs are, you figure out how to get planes back in there and restart service. And that all happens very quickly. What we're learning is that in this pandemic plan, the phases can be weeks. So, sort of adjusting to what that would look like. And then I would tell you the other huge learning for us is just all the corporate campus support functions. So this is the first time that we sent everybody home. Again, you think about a tornado or a hurricane, that's for a day or two. Don't necessarily get a lot of hurricanes here in Dallas, but a day or two. And this has obviously been weeks. So this has been since I think March 16th that we've sent the entire corporate campus home except for essential personnel. So we will really think through in our future response plans, knowing that this could happen for a long time. Laptop availability, what does that need to look like? Childcare issues, because we've always had all the schools, right, that are now closed, and so you've got workers who have school age children that even as we're thinking about returning people to campus, there's going to be some personal situations that we're going to have to figure out how to work through that none of us thought about in a return to work plan after a weather event, as an example. So those are some of the big learnings that we'll be, pulling into sort of an update of our pandemic plan.
Tell me about the care and feeding of your own team. How are you managing their needs? A lot of people talking about mental health issues. There's isolation issues. Obviously, being busy and active is important. There are some that obviously are trying to do it all, right? Trying to juggle all these balls. But from a SVP, so you're the head of the team of 100 people. What are you focused on in terms of your own team's well-being and health?
Well, the first thing I would tell you is that we have an extraordinarily talented and strong team one. So this is not me. This is our managing director of communication and outreach, Lori Barnett. This is our managing director of culture and engagement, Whitney Eichinger. This is their executive assistants, Mallory Piles and Renata De Elena. So it's a team effort, and I think that as a team, what we're really good at doing is tapping into one another's strengths. I think that because we know one another pretty well, we're able to just sort of do check-ins and know when someone needs to maybe step away or take care of something. Everyone has their own personal situations that they're bringing to this as well, and so it's acknowledging those. Someone might have elderly parents that they're concerned about. Another one might have a graduating senior from high school,
Right.
graduating senior from college, a child with anxiety issues, and so all of that, and so know your people. I would say, first of all, know your people. And that's understanding what gets them excited, and then also knowing when they might be at their point where they need to step away. I was just having a conversation yesterday with Chris Talley, because one of the things, because this has gone on so long, that USAA is thinking about is actually taking their entire communications team and breaking them into shifts, which I thought was really interesting, because it's sort of been everybody on, right? And then everybody's taking turns and filling in where they need to. They're looking at actually mandating shifts so that people will step away and get that sort of mental health refresh, which I thought was really interesting concept. So, we'll be having conversations around what that looks like internally, even as we begin to return people to campus. I think probably, this has gone on for, 2.5 months. So you can understand where people might be tired and needing, and of course everybody feels guilty, right? On one hand, we're asking everybody who can to take a voluntary leave or time off without pay, except we're super busy. And then if someone says, well, I'm willing to either take time off without pay or what we call PTO, right, a vacation day, then you've got people feeling like, can I really take a vacation day in the midst of this crisis? I mean, is that allowed? And so making sure that we're communicating that that's okay, and that if you need time away to make you a better you, then we need to be mindful of that. So I would say it's, know your people, have a strong team one, play to everyone's strengths on that team one, and then lastly, and this is just how I roll, you got to be real. I mean, you just have to be able to say it like it is, and if someone just needs to let off some steam, you got to let them do it.
And the good old Texan way. That would be interesting. Now, do you videotape those and analyze those afterwards?
No.
So this is a comment from Kim Garraway, who was in that class, the crisis class last summer, and heard you and said, this isn't a question, but a comment for Linda. When COVID hit, I immediately remembered something you told us during the session for Terry's crisis class. Scrub your digital content right away. Content that could be considered insensitive in the new reality. My team definitely had some work to do there, and I'm thankful for having heard your previous lecture to MCM. So that was
fabulous.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
And honestly, we had to do that again. So, as you think about we had, and this is interesting, we not only did we have to scrub our external content in the face of this COVID, we actually had to scrub our internal content. I'll give you an example. So externally, we had pictures of, you went to our website and we were telling you to book your summer beach vacation, and there were pictures of crowded beaches. And so then you're thinking, okay, well, that's tone deaf. So we had to go in and change a lot of that imagery. Internally, we have an email that we send, we send to every single employee every 2 weeks that tells you what your PTO bank is, right? About how many hours you have to take off. It used to start with a phrase that said, here's the time you can take to enjoy in the sun and fun, and dot dot dot, and went on to tell you. And so we're like, oh my god, that's totally tone inappropriate. And so we actually had to, the people department, which is our HR function, had to totally rewrite those emails to take advantage, to understand and to take into account the current environment. So we even had to scrub some of our templated employee emails to make sure that we didn't sound goofy to our own 60,000 employees as we were telling them, here's all the time off you have, go have fun, go spend time in the sun. And it's like, no. So yeah, so even we even had to go back in and in the face of this crisis and look at internal content as well as external.
When you're thinking of moving from one side of the dining room table to the other to really enjoy that separation household.
Yeah, my husband has commandeered the dining room table as his own, but it really is interesting to watch him every 2 days move to a different seat so that his background looks different and so that the light shining on him looks a little different. So he works with a number of international colleagues, and so he could be on the phone with Singapore and Cyprus and Sweden, and they're all having a lot of fun with him changing his zip code in the dining room every day.
Ashika asked a question: how do you plan on using multimedia storytelling in your follow-up efforts?
Really any way we can. I think one of the things that we're looking to do, and here's an example right now. So as we return employees to the corporate campus, there's a lot that's going to look different. In other words, our cafeterias might not be open. We might want to limit the number of people who can get in an elevator. We might want to make stairwells one way. We've got to remind people we're a big hugging culture. So when we get people back on campus, you're not just going to start running up to people and hugging them. So what can a Southwest cultural greeting look like that's appropriate in this new normal? Well, we started writing all that up and then went, you know what, we need to do a day in the life of an employee. So we're filming tomorrow an employee getting out of his car, at our headquarters building, and then coming in and recognizing that he needs to socially distance himself from others. He needs to get his temperature checked when he comes in. And so we decided that a day in the life video would actually help us tell that story. So even in our internal comms, we're getting much more multimedia savvy to recognize that people aren't going to sit there and read a 4-page memo of you shall not, you will do this, you won't do this, and decided to take that all into a video format. How we move forward, we're definitely looking at, so we're kind of working pretty tactically right now in what I call the 30, 60, 90-day plans that our CEOs asked us to be focused on. And we're sort of in that, we've responded, and we're now just starting to bridge into that respond recovery. We're obviously nowhere near thrive at this point yet, but I think as we get more into recovery, following employees, as they're serving customers and making them feel comfortable, watching the gate announcements that they give, watching our flight attendants interact with customers on board, getting some of that will still be important, I think, because it's going to be evidence of those interactions, those healthy interactions we can have with our customers and even our cohorts, the people that we work with as we move through this recovery period. So telling the story of reopening our international markets, telling the stories of what our onboard, in-flight and beverage service might look like now, 30 days from now, 60 days from now. So there's definitely going to be a role for multimedia, as we move through this process.
Did you appoint somebody early to kind of catalog all the lessons learned? Is there somebody that has that job in your team that is the sort of keeper or the aggregator of all these ideas?
Thankfully, yes. We actually have an emergency response team that's part of communication and outreach. So I mentioned the managing director of communication and outreach. That senior director reports up to her, and it is her role basically and her team, and they've been doing exactly that. They've been chronicling decisions when we needed to change policies, if there was a gap in a policy that we noticed as part of this process. And so they're going to be the ones who will take charge of revamping the pandemic plan and then bringing it back in front of the executive team to take a look at. There's obviously been some things that we noted from a risk perspective too. So if you think about not just emergency response, but enterprise risk, as we get flying again, it's one thing to know how we have improved our pandemic plan. It's another thing to understand that we might still have some supply chain issues. Can you get airplane tires as fast as you need to, because other parts of the supply chain have been shut down or furloughed or restricted in some way. And so her team has been charged with chronicling and aggregating all of that for the organization.
Speaking of
that leader has both emergency response and enterprise risk management.
Right. Excellent. Speaking of that enterprise risk management, any updates on 737 MAX? They've had some time that's not really been, other things have taken the headlines.
Yeah, it's this is such an interesting what was the worst thing that could possibly happen in January by not getting airplanes ready to fly again is now it's fallen off the list in terms of crisis, and for a couple of reasons. One, in January, we're at 70 plus airplanes that were grounded among the MAX fleet, and we wanted them back in the air like tomorrow. Now, when you are dealing with travel demand that has dropped off the cliff and some customer anxiety about when people might feel comfortable traveling again, we've got 400 airplanes on the ground. There is not a rush to bring those into the fleet, and so we're going to get to be more measured about when we want to introduce the MAX airplanes. That said, as you look out over the next 15 years, the Boeing 737 MAX is absolutely our future. So as we retire older airplanes, we're definitely bringing new MAXs into the fleet. But now that there is a, sorry about that. Now that there is a dip in travel, we can be a lot more thoughtful about how and when we bring it back in. The latest on the MAX is that Boeing thinks that the FAA will be able to unground them at the end of August. We obviously then have several weeks of work to do to update our manuals, to make the software upgrades in the cockpit, and to get all of our pilots trained. To then begin to roll those MAXs back into the fleet, but we're just not in the rush that we were in January. So, certainly continue to work with Boeing, continue to work with the FAA. There is still a desire that the world's aviation authorities would act in concert, so that the Chinese Aviation Authority, EASA, the Canadians, and the FAA, that all of those aviation authorities would come together to sort of unground the MAX in a move of unity. So we're still hopeful for that, so that you don't see these rolling, global release of the airplane.
Right. So last question before we let you go, and what do you wish you had known, or what kind of resources do you wish you had on March 13th that you?
Oh, wow. Knowing what I know now, it would have been great on March 13th if everyone had been as good as they are now at virtual conferencing, like being able to collaborate virtually. We learned that very quickly, and I think we've gotten good at it, but how great would it have been, honestly, if we were just in the practice that every single one of our meetings had an opportunity for a virtual connection, so that we were a much better organization culturally at recognizing that I can value you as much in Canada as I can if you were sitting across the desk from me. And so, that's probably a wish and a want. And then the other one would be to already know what I know now, 12 weeks in on March 13th, because I've learned a lot over the last couple of months about, honestly, I've learned a ton around financing deals. Southwest has done obviously a lot to, we did a supplemental stock offering. We went to the open market. We drew down our financial revolver. We took the payroll support plan from the government. We made application for the loan. Don't yet know that we would take the loan, but we have until the end of September to decide that. But I've learned a ton about financing deals. I learned a ton about cash flow, because I can look at a balance sheet and they're very big numbers, but when you don't have money coming in and yet that money is going out, it is Yep, a stark reality for an organization our size. So I've learned just a ton around cash flow and literally how closely we are monitoring cash coming in and going out of this organization every single day in this environment. So I've learned a lot about that.
Cash is king. That's for sure.
Yep.
Well, look, Linda, I want to thank you on behalf of the whole MCM community for giving us an hour of your time. I know it is very precious. I know that you're a big fan of all educational institutes, not just
Absolutely.
Texas Tech, but we hope that we're your favorite in Canada at least. And I'm sure that after the pandemic, you know, my continuous bugging you of when are you going to fly into Canada? You know, there's a lot of great Canadians who drive to Buffalo or some parts of the States to fly Southwest, and we'd love to have that opportunity as well. But thank you so much. We think about you each and every day. You're on the front lines of this pandemic, and you're doing really good service to the folks at Southwest. So thank you so much for all of this, and wish you all the best. And I look forward to seeing you sometime in 2020.
Same here. Same here. I look
Yes.
forward to seeing you. But thank you all for what you're doing. Obviously, as working professionals, we're all in this together. But it's been a real treat for me to share and spend some time with you today. And great questions. So I really appreciate it.
Great. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Right
Bye
on.
bye.
Bye-bye.